What's up, everybody? First of all, happy Juneteenth to everybody out there. I don't know how it is not yet a national holiday, but hopefully we will change that soon. It seems to me, without getting overly political, that the two most important holidays we would want to celebrate as a nation, it's trying to come together with a shared purpose. The first would be July 4th, and the second would be Juneteenth, because July 4th is when we declared our independence, and then Juneteenth is sort of when we finally acknowledged that we did it wrong and we had to make amends for that. And obviously, we're nowhere near perfect, and this is not a political show in any way, shape, or form. But I think we can all just call out differences in equality that make sense to try and set up. So I'm going to try and do more of these live shows on a weekly basis. I'm picking Friday afternoon right now. Hopefully, I can do Friday afternoon from henceforth. But I wanted to set up these shows so that if you had questions for me as we write and produce our stories, the idea is for the whole YouTube channel is that as we write and produce our stories, that we can give back to you by giving you information about how you might be able to write and produce your stories. But maybe you're just one of our fans and you've been reading one of our books and you'd like more information on it. I can talk about that too. And I also have a new course out on Udemy. Probably eventually move it into our own platform at some point in time. But on Udemy, I have a course specifically about finding an audience, which you need to do if you're a writer or a producer. You need to find an audience for your stuff. So all that to say, you can leave me questions in the comments, and then I will answer those questions. In the event that I don't have any comments, which can happen a lot of times, then I will go ahead and just talk about a specific topic and give you some of my thoughts on my perspective regarding that. Some of the experience I've had going through the process of learning how to do this better, which is, of course, something I'm still learning. I'm still constantly learning how to do this stuff better. The marketplace is constantly changing, and that means that I need to adapt my own learning so that I can stay in touch with what's going on. So I'll try and do that too. But yeah, leave me comments. You can leave comments on, I'll probably see them if they come in on Facebook. I will probably see them if they come in on YouTube. I have the comments all set up here. Sometimes it does not give me your name when you leave a comment. I think specifically Facebook doesn't always leave your name. So if you want me to know who it is, you can leave your name in there too. So yeah, go ahead and ask me any questions you have regarding writing, how to find an audience, producing content, whether it's, we've produced the short film, we have produced books, we've produced all kinds of stuff. So if there's anything that you want to know about there, then let me know and I'll be happy to answer you. Oh, we already have our first question from Jess/Will. What's up, Jess Will? He says, would love your thoughts on marketing during a pre-release period. This is a really, really good question. And so here's some complex thoughts about marketing during a pre-release period. This is the time in which the book is not actually the movie, the whatever is not actually available yet, but you want to generate support for it before it actually comes out. So it's actually a really great question, because especially when you're trying to find an audience for your work, the sooner you find that audience, the better. So I'm going to say two things in answer. By the way, this is a fantastic question. So thank you, Jess/Will. This is a fantastic question, because when it comes to finding your audience, one of the things that people get wrong, and I talk a lot about this in my program, but you guys are just going to get, because you're here with me live, you're going to get some of the content of that program now. One of the things that writers and producers get wrong about finding an audience is that it feels like you need to have a product first before you can have an audience for your product, right? Common sense would tell you, like, well, I need to have something before I have people that want it, right? But actually, in this regard, this is counterintuitive. But before you have a product, you can have an audience. You can sell based on an idea. And this is something that I learned during my time with tech startups, is that part of generating an audience was having to go in and say, this is something that I want to produce, and then trying to find like who is really excited about me producing that. So I'm going way back in the process when I talk about before releasing something, going all the way back into the point where it's just an idea for you. This is just an idea. And what do I do with this idea? Well, then you can start to test that idea on different audiences, right? For example, we're working on Death of a Bounty Hunter right now. Death of a Bounty Hunter is going to come out as a full cast audiobook. It is already out as a novel, but it's in I'll talk about this too, because there's a specific reason why we did this. But it's coming out as a novel, coming out as an audiobook. It's out as a novel now. In fact, if you go to deathofabountyhunter.com, you can get yourself a copy for 99 cents. It's sort of a pre-release release in some ways. But you can go way back in your process, way back to the very beginning to go, are people interested in this? So I won't go into the full story behind Death of a Bounty Hunter and how it was released, but far before it was ever released to the public, and far before it was in its final iteration as well, I released it to several friends of mine, and I actually picked about 7 or 8 of them because I was looking for who will actually like this book when it comes out. This is before it was we even thought of it being an audiobook, honestly. Who will like this book before it comes out? And so we went into this process, and I chose these 8 people, and I did it kind of at random. And I kind of did it on purpose at random because one of the things that I wanted to tackle was I wanted to know who wasn't interested in it. So this is the thing that can get really hard for writers. You can look at your writing and you can look at it and say, well, I think it's for this audience. And then you try to go after that audience. And then some people don't really fit into that audience who you thought might fit into that audience. And then you hear feedback like, oh yeah, it's not, it's good, or whatever. Like, it's not really my thing or whatever. Like, so you want to actually hear those comments really, really early, because if you think you're producing something for a specific group of people and you realize that they don't really resonate with it, you can either adjust it so that it sort of fits what they want some more, or you can actually say, oh, they're not really in my target audience and I shouldn't be even trying to target them. And so I released Death of a Bounty Hunter early. Again, it was probably not even called Death of a Bounty Hunter at that point. Probably didn't have a final name for it. I released it to a group of about 7 or 8 people, and they started giving me feedback. And a bunch of them said, wow, it's pretty Western, and I'm not really into Westerns. Or it's pretty steampunk. I'm not really into steampunk. I mean, you can see the poster behind me on the wall right here. It's very Western, steampunk, even a little bit of fantasy sci-fi involved. And so I think the first thing I would say, Jess will, is that I would start revealing what you're doing, whether it's a concept, a premise, some of the main characters. This is the story. This is the log line that I'm thinking about writing. Is this something that would interest you? And then you can start to track, okay, well, who's saying it would interest them and who's really not that interested? Because for the people who are really interested, you're like, oh, that's awesome. I'm actually writing a story that I think you would really like. Would you mind reading it when I have a chance to release it to you? Even you can do that even just with a concept premise in your hands, right? So I think that the first thing I would say is in your pre-release time frame, even start to sell to people. And when I say sell to people, all I mean is you pitch it to them and see if they're interested in it. I'm not saying like sell, like, oh, you got to be like somehow slimy sales. I'm not talking about that. It's just you're trying to find interest. Even try and find interest before you've even putting anything down on a page, maybe. That's a really, really good place to start. Then what else do you do before pre-release? Well, you can do a Kickstarter. You can set up Patreon and try to get people on their Patreon. I've never done a Kickstarter. I have done an Indiegogo for the short film that we made. And obviously film and writing prose are 2 different things. And Alexander, I noticed that you have a question. I will get to your question in a minute. Film and prose are 2 different things, because film, obviously, if you don't have the budget going in, then you need to do some sort of fundraising in some way, shape, or form. Whereas with prose, a lot of times if you have a computer, you can publish something, right? So it's a little bit different, but I would say, like I said, get people involved even before you have anything on the page. When you're doing a film fundraising, you're going to need that pitch anyways, so that people will generate money for you to be able to make your film. So you need to be able to have something to pitch to them. And then as you get closer and closer to your release date, maybe you're in production, there's just lots of different marketing strategies that you can try. One of the things that I do is we do the Story Geeks podcast, which I'm stepping away from for the summer. But the Story Geeks podcast is a way for me to advertise some of the stuff that I'm working on, because we can let people know about it. If you like what I like, then you will probably like which is what the Story Geeks podcast is, then you will probably like my stories as well. So there's that component to it. Get it. Maybe there's a good friend of mine, Caleb Monroe. He has a weekly newsletter that he sends out. So that's another way you can do it. But just being in front of the people that have already said, I'm very interested in what you're doing. And then just constantly giving back to them a little bit more from what you're preparing to do, I think is a really, really good idea. And then the audience just keeps growing. Tell them to invite their friends, have a YouTube channel, showcase some of your stuff on YouTube, release a chapter early, whatever. All of these things to just keep generating attention, generating interest, and keep people involved. When you get up to closer to your release date, I'm going to do a whole series on this. So just take what I'm saying with it's just a little bit of what is to come, right? Because there's a lot of stuff here. It's a really, really big question. And I really appreciate it. It's a great question. But before you then release, one of the things that you want to think about. So I'll just tell you the story of Time Slingers, and I'll tell you the story of Death of the Bounty Hunter back here, how we handled those differently. You need to, on Amazon, prove that there are people in this type of audience, right? Here's the mass market, but here's my market that I'm trying to reach. Mass market, huge. My market is just this. There are people in this market that love what I'm doing. If somebody reads it and they're off over here and they're in this, like, I love, these people say, I love prairie romance. Okay, well, I don't love prairie romance. So the chances of me liking that book, it'd have to be like the best book on the face of the earth in prairie romance. But if it's something like, like steampunk Western, like, okay, I'm probably in, right? Like, I like that kind of stuff. That sounds good to me. So you have to find those people and then ask them if they will review your book when it comes out. So I say start selling to them. What I call it is audience development, because it's not really sales. It shouldn't feel salesy. It shouldn't feel like you're tricking people into doing something for you. Rather, it should feel like a value exchange. I'll give you something. If you do this, I'll give you the book at a discount. I'll let you read a PDF copy when it comes out early, whatever it is. And then ask them if they'd be willing to review your book, because then post-release, you already have feedback about who likes your book and who doesn't. And that is really positive for when you get into the fact that, like, when people show up, it's really surprising. Like with Time Slingers, for example. Time Slingers is our time travel novel. There's people that will buy Time Slingers because of our advertising campaign, who purchase Time Slingers, and then they're like, I hate it. And then I look at why they hate it, and I'm like, well, you didn't read any of the reviews, obviously, because if you'd read the reviews, you would know that this book is not what you're looking for at all. And so that's what that is that's finding people who you thought were in your target market, but were actually outside of your target market in that mass market, who were never interested in your story to begin with. Somebody said, some people are like, oh, this is really innovative. The Writer's Digest judge called it trailblazing, and said it would have a place in literary history because there'd be a lot of copycats. And then I had another guy say, that's a Writer's Digest person, right? There's another guy who goes, it felt like I was reading something that was written on Twitter. I mean, he said it meaner than that, but like that's basically like the difference, right? That's the difference. That's the difference in trying to find your audience early on. So I'm a really big proponent of, before your release. It's such a great question. I appreciate it. Trying to find your audience before your release. So fantastic question. I will get into that more and more throughout my program and on this YouTube channel. So if you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe. And thanks for the question. I really appreciate that. That's great. Alexander asks, how specific do we need to be in identifying our target audience? This is a fantastic question. I have some idea of the demographic of my target audience belongs to and what subgenre of fantasy, what else is needed. Okay. This is a fantastic question, Alexander. I don't know Alexander. I know Jess, but I don't know Alexander. So Alexander, thank you for asking this amazing question. So this is why I'm creating the Udemy course, which, by the way, I think is on sale right now. I think I'm charging, like $155 on Udemy, and I think they have it on sale right now for like $11. So if you want to see my complete list, Alexander, you can go actually onto I should have left a link in the comments. Actually, you know what? I'll leave a link right here, because I can do that right now. I'll leave a link in the comments of the video. But this is a great question, and the course goes into a lot of detail on this. But Alexander, since you asked it, I'm going to answer as much as I can right now. So when you're identifying your target audience, how deep do you need to go? This is Actually, this is a really insightful question because most people don't even think to ask that question. Most people think I'm writing a fantasy novel or I'm writing a Western novel. And so, therefore, people who like fantasy will end up liking my novel. Okay, so here's what I learned when I was doing the tech startup that I was working for. I was doing a tech startup trying to figure out there's a process in the tech startup world called customer development. And customer development is understanding who your customer is and who your customer is not. In customer development, what you quickly realize is that people who have the problem you're trying to solve oftentimes do not see the problem the way you see the problem and therefore do not want to invest in your solution. And what that means, basically, to Alexander's point here, to Alexander's question, a lot of times you will assume people are in your audience, in your target audience for what you're producing, and they're not. And the reason you assume it is because I assumed this myself, by the way, it's something I had to learn, that if I like this thing and they say that they like similar things, then we probably will agree that we like this, right? But the problem is we like things for vastly different reasons, and we see the problems in the world for vastly different perspectives. I recently read a couple of time travel novels by Blake Crouch, and then I read a time travel novel. I can't remember the other guy's name. It was called the name of this novel was All Are Wrong Todays, I believe. Okay, so all three novels, Dark Matter, Recursion, and All Are Wrong Todays, all three of those novels are extremely well written, very creative in the time travel genre. However, I would tell you that All Are Wrong Todays was definitely not marketed or created for me as a target audience. Blake Crouch's material, much more up my alley. And I'll tell you some of the small differences. Blake Crouch is writing essentially an adventure story, an action-oriented story, and the other writer who's writing All of Our Wrong Todays is writing more of an internal processing, very clever narrative. It's really funny. They have a whole chapter that's just cuss words. Spoiler alert. But it's very, very, very clever. And I think that that's cool, but I would not want to read an entire novel and dedicate that amount of time to something that's really clever. I also don't think that that would make a great movie because most of the cleverness is in the writing. A lot of the cleverness is coming through in the writing, the way he crafted the prose. However, with Blake Crouch, his books would make great movies because they're just action oriented, boom, 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 boom. Well, a lot of people who pick up Time Slingers who think that they're getting kind of more of a in-depth, thought-provoking book go, oh, it's kind of like quick and it's kind of also like intense, but it's not that deep. Then they go, oh, I don't really like it. Okay, that's fine. It's not for you. It's not for you. That's fine. That's we're looking for this audience. You were in this audience. That's totally okay. But my point being, to Alexander's question, is that there are elements of what you're trying to do where you might actually need to go deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And so I would say, I have 4 workbooks that I have provided in my Udemy course. And in those 4 workbooks, the first thing I have you do is unearth some of the things about you that you care about. And that list is crazy long. I have both psychographic characteristics and demographic characteristics. Those are 2 big words. Psychographic characteristics are just how you think and feel about things. What are your favorite genres? Who are some of your favorite characters? What are some of your favorite movies? What kind of spiritual perspective do you have? What kind of cultural perspective do you have? What is causing you to have a lot of anxiety right now? What's causing you to have depression right now? What's causing you to feel emotions right now? I ask all of those things. You fill all of those things out. Then you go to the demographics and you go, well, what kind of demographics are there? Well, there's age and there's where you live and there's what ethnicity, what ethnic background you are, what race you are, all these things. Not all of those things matter to the story that you're writing right now. But then the next workbook, I have you say, okay, let's take those things that matter to the story I'm producing, and then let me figure out. So, for example, for Death of a Bounty Hunter, people. So, what am I thinking? I'm thinking, okay, well, it's a lot of it is structurally based off of my favorite movie of all time, Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a similar structure there because I was inspired by it. It's steampunk because I like steampunk. It's Western and it deals with people's moral codes because I'm interested in that, especially at a time in history where a lot of our perspectives are pretty morally relative. I'm interested in that. That makes me want to write about it. It makes me want to consider it and explore it when I write something. So you write all those things down, and then your essential goal is to say, if this. By the way, if you hear that, that's my dog scratching. I have a studio dog. If my purpose is to write for myself first, and then expand from myself into my target audience, I call it an avid audience, the audience that wants to read the thing that you're working on. As you transition into that, you want to look at what about me influenced this story, and where will I find other people who want to consider those same things. Could be a psychographic characteristic, could be a demographic characteristic, could be a combination of the two. And as I say that, you definitely do not want to. The whole purpose of finding an audience by looking at yourself first. The intent is not to narrow down your audience so that it feels like you're being exclusionary. The real purpose is to find the core audience of people who will go, this is so amazing. It really speaks to me. And now I want to go tell other people about it. So I definitely am not advocating for being like exclusionary, but you are writing for yourself first. And then how does what I did for myself expand to other people? And that's where you get that avid audience. That's where you get the people that are really into it. So I would say, Alexander, that there's a whole host of characteristics. How are you feeling about things? What is your spiritual perspective about things? What is, and by the way, I say spiritual perspective. You can that includes atheism, right? It doesn't mean you have to have some agreed upon other spiritual perspective. It could be, I don't have one. I don't think there is a spiritual realm at all. That could be your spiritual perspective. But whatever it is you're trying to unearth in the story you're working on, because my Death of a Bounty Hunter, we call it a supernatural steampunk Western. So there's why, because I'm interested in the supernatural. So of course I'm going to work that into my writing. If you don't care about the supernatural at all and don't want to see it in stories, then you probably won't like it, right? Like, and that's totally fine. We all like different things. It's no big deal. I wish people on Amazon would think about that before they started reviewing books, but whatever. Or Facebook too. They do that on Facebook. So yeah, hopefully that helps answer your question. But I would look at, psychographic characteristics. If you look up psychographic, the definition of psychographic is how you think and feel about things. What are your favorite movies? What are your favorite books, et cetera, et cetera? Favorite characters, why those things are important to you. And then I'd look at the demographic characteristics. Am I living in a part of the world where this story is especially relevant, or is it global? Am I living in a city that I want to write about because other people in this city would find it really fascinating? Then those are all really good things to include in your first core avid audience, that target market you're trying to reach before anybody else. Of course, lots of people read about stories about New York all across the world. But if I was writing a story about New York, I'd be like, well, I want to get it right so that New Yorkers are like, this is New York, right? So my avid audience, the one audience, that core little audience that I start with, that actually might be New Yorkers even. So there you go. Those are two questions. Those are two fantastic questions, by the way. I literally thought about doing a live stream at 1:30, and I jumped onto a live stream at 2:05, and I thought, if there's nobody asking any good questions, then I guess I'll just talk about stuff. But you guys came up with awesome questions, and I really appreciate that. If you do have another question, go ahead and leave me a question down in the comments, but I'll start to wrap up if nobody else has a question. If you want to get my full-blown perspective on how to find your audience, and how to go about the process of finding your audience, given my tech startup background and what I learned doing that. My very quick story is we released Time Slingers Actually, the cover that's over here, that was the original cover of Time Slingers. We released Time Slingers when it looked like that back in the day, and it went nowhere. It went. There's a few people that bought it, and they were very nice to do so. But what I realized is that I'd written it without first thinking through an audience. I just released it without thinking through an audience. So to Jess's point, I needed to do things pre-release. I needed to do a lot of things pre-release. So we re-released it, but before we re-released it, we went through an in-depth process of making sure we could find an avid audience who really cared about it. And then once you do that process, then you're looking at being able to advertise, because you start to realize, oh, these are the kinds of people that really like it. So I can advertise to these kinds of people and actually know that they will be likely to buy it. Because otherwise you're throwing your dollars away into nowhere, right? So really quick question here from Cody. And this will be the last question that I address for today. But if you guys like this, make sure you hit the like button, because I definitely want to do more of these question and answer sessions for everybody. If it's helpful, especially if you're thinking about writing and producing your own book, then I'm here. I'm here to answer questions for you. And there isn't enough people on here yet to have a super chat, so you get all of your questions for sure answered, hopefully, which is cool. So Cody, my brother, actually. So what's up, Cody? Also a self-published author, by the way. Go search for Cody Shear if you like fantasy sci-fi stuff. You can check his stuff out. How much time would you recommend putting towards finding an audience as opposed to time spent writing, researching, marketing, etc.? Ooh, this is a really good question. So this is a good one to end on. So thank you, Cody. Okay, so here is I read advice for podcasts one time that said you should spend about twice as much energy, better way of putting it, promoting your podcast than you should putting work into your podcast, if you want it to be listened to, obviously. There's always a caveat that I have here in anything I say about writing and producing. There's always a caveat. And that caveat is, maybe your goal isn't to get an audience. Maybe you just want to write stuff to write stuff. Maybe you want to just podcast to get your thoughts out there and just podcast. Now, writing and podcasting, the marketplaces are saturated with content. So if you do want an audience, you need to think through, if I want an audience, it's going to take a lot of effort to get that audience. It doesn't just show up because you did something, right? If you build it, they will come is not good advice. So this question is a good one from Cody. So how much time should you spend looking for your audience versus how much time should you spend writing, researching, marketing, whatever? So the first thing I would say is that I would say that trying to find your audience and marketing are the same thing. So just include trying to find an audience in what you would consider marketing, which by definition, in a good marketing, my background is in marketing, corporate marketing, entrepreneurship marketing, whatever. When you're looking for an audience, it's essentially marketing. You're just doing some research and trying to figure out, you're trying to be more strategic about what your audience looks like. So I would include trying to find any activities related to trying to find your audience. I would call that marketing, first and foremost. Secondly, this podcast advice that I was just telling you guys about is telling you all about, I should say. I know that there's hopefully some females out there watching as well. I don't mean to be gender pronoun or gender bias with my descriptions, but I know that that the advice was spend twice as much time marketing as you did working on your podcast. Now, I've had to take a step back from the podcast. I'm not going to be doing as many podcasts on the Story Geeks podcast, right here, the Story Geeks podcast, because of how much energy we put into that podcast. It's probably at least 11 hours if you're preparing questions, and maybe even as much as 15 just to do the podcast. And then, so if you're saying like 15 hours to do the podcast, you'd spend 30 hours promoting it. I mean, that's what the recommendation was. And so here's the thing. If you're going to write and produce, which means self-publishing, or if you're doing a movie, it means producing the movie yourself. If you're going to do that, then you need to spend a lot of time on the business activities. You can't just be a writer. There are tricks you can do to bring more people to your work. So, for example, the film that we've done, the short film that we've released, Star Wars Rivals, is a Star Wars short film, Star Wars fan film. Well, why did we do a Star Wars fan film? Because I know that Star Wars films have an audience, and I know that people like Star Wars. Whereas if I did just like a space battle short film, I mean, that probably wouldn't have an audience to begin with. I'd have to find my audience some other way. So there are things you can do. You can do fan fiction, get an audience way faster, right? Because there are people that are actively looking for more content that the big producers are not creating. And if you could say, well, here's my perspective on how I would do these things, that's why fan fiction gets so much attention. It's not even a bad marketing strategy. I don't do it because I want to own my own intellectual property. The Star Wars short film we did as a tribute, and we wanted to showcase what bullying looked like, and we wanted it to be an anti-bullying type of thing. But for the most part, when it comes to like we own the IP for Death of a Bounty Hunter and Time Slingers, like we own it, and I prefer that. So if you're going to produce your own thing, you need to think at least a little bit like a business person, right? You need to think to yourself like, I need to find an audience. And so then the question is, well, how much time, Cody's question, how much time do you spend doing that versus doing your actual writing? And so here's the annoying answer that I've come to is that writing and marketing, researching your audience, knowing your audience, going after your audience, writing and trying to find your avid audience and tell them about the stuff you're doing is all the same thing. And I have to look at it that way because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say there's not separation between the work and getting the work out. There's not separation between these two things. They're one and the same thing. It's all part of the same process. And that's not how most people would think of it. Most people would think of it as like I write and then I take off that writing hat and I go step into this other world. But think about it this way. If you're looking for an avid audience and you're trying to promote your work to that avid audience, you can start giving them your writing much earlier on to review, right? You can be giving them drafts of chapters and be like, what do you think of this? How do you feel how do you feel about this? You can be changing stuff because of the way they feel about it. And you're like, or you can find out that they're not in your audience, by the way. Every change that someone recommends is not necessarily a good change. That's a totally different video. But in terms of when you're looking for an audience and when you're writing, that's the same process. That's the same thing. You're doing the same activities. You're writing. Now, obviously you're writing for yourself. And that's why you don't want to get too crazy about people's comments. If they're good comments and they make sense in the context of your story, then do it. But so so how much time should you spend? I spend way more time trying to find an audience, trying to make sure that the business is set up well. Because again, I'm producing this whole thing, right? So I spend way more time doing that than I actually spend writing. I am passionate about writing. I love writing. Writing to me is super, super fun. But I spend as much time on the business aspects of it because I don't want part of the passion for me in writing is to be able to share that with people, to be able to share an experience and share feedback and share what's going on in the world around us to help us bring understanding to it. And so therefore, it can't just be something that I do and then don't do anything with after that. It has to be something that I work on all throughout the process with other people in mind. It's why I co-write with Nathan. Nathan Sheck is the co-writer of both Time Slingers and Death of a Bounty Hunter. And I do that specifically. Even the actors we've brought on to do all of the voice work for Death of a Bounty Hunter. It sounds so good, by the way. I'm so stoked about Death of a Bounty Hunter, the audiobook version. But it's all encompassing. It's all of these moving parts, and I think about them all in context as the same thing. So my advice to you is if you do want an audience and you do want to, we hit top seller status. I think it's probably like 12 or 16 weeks at top seller status. We'll hopefully be back there again pretty soon. We'll see. But all of those things, you don't get them if you don't also step away from the writing to engage with other people about the writing. And to me, that's just part of the process at this point, and it's a big part of the process. So I don't have necessarily an hourly breakdown, but you know, it's almost impossible to break it down hourly because I'm spending so much time doing the latter. But maybe like 20% writing, like 80% of the other stuff. something like that, something crazy like that. That's a lot. Now, granted, it's different at different times, but fantastic questions. That was awesome. If you guys want me to do this more often, leave your comments down below. And by the way, that, like I said, Udemy has discounted my course significantly. So if you're interested in the workbooks I produce, I'm taking all of my tech startup knowledge, my marketing background, and my background as a writer about trying to get this to be a top seller, which we achieved. And I'm putting that into that course. So hopefully you find that course really valuable. And on Udemy right now, it's like super cheap. It's like, I think it's like $10 or something, 10, $11. And I don't control that because that's their discount. But yeah, go check it out. I've had the link in the comments there, and I'll put the link to in the description once this is on YouTube exclusively. But thank you so much for watching today. And thanks so much to Alexander, to Jess, and to Cody for bringing some awesome questions to the table. I appreciate it. My studio is getting crazy hot because as I sit here, I don't have any AC on, or I don't have a fan on. So pretty soon I'm going to start sweating under these lights. But I really appreciate you guys coming out to on a Friday afternoon to ask some questions. That was really fun. I'm going to try to do this every Friday afternoon. So make sure you subscribe, hit that like button for me. And thanks for hanging out. That was fun. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.